Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. Since January of 2022, I have been making a concerted effort to become a better reader, to read more even, to quote the title of a video that I just watched today by booktuber Alana Estelle. And as we approach the end of the year, this being 2023, I've thought that I would like to review my progress so far. And I've also had the thought that I should take the books that I've logged in my little journal starting January 1st of 2022 and talk about last year's reading, since it all predates or precedes my time as a booktuber. I'm not quite sure when I started BookTube, but it really begins sometime after I had read Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire and the Arabian Nights, both sort of milestones on the path. And so everything before that can be taken as a chunk, I think. But in addition to that, and harder to reconstruct, is what I am thinking of as my prehistory as a reader. So if something is written down in a book, it becomes one's history. If it hasn't, then you're left with what you're left with. Now, the archaeological record is not completely devoid of matter. I've been on Facebook for probably a dozen years now. I'm not going back to look that up. And a lot of what I've done while on Facebook has been to talk about what I was reading. I have a few good friends who are readers as well, and people have enjoyed the content that I've posted, usually quotations from whatever was at hand or on my plate at that time period. I would trace my, I'm trying to say what, ab Facebook period, my since starting Facebook period reading, really to about a period of 10 years, so 10 years previous to this, and I want to reconstruct that. But so there are remnants in the archaeological record there, but I have not done any kind of a thorough excavation. I've just briefly did a quick search to see what I could come up with and made some quick copies, and I will read some Facebook posts to you. Now, they are mostly posts looking backward also, but for the sake of prehistory, precise dates are impossible and probably unnecessary also. But I do want to provide a ground for the further explorations or investigations or delvings into the theme. There are other remnants from the archaeological period that I can refer to, and some of those would be books that I bought that I never read or only read partially. And I pulled a few of those off of their shelves to show you. Being not a reader and reading largely being alien to me, except for an as-needed basis, my desires have exceeded my grasp, but nevertheless, it is I'm not quite sure what the word is. It is an indicator of where my mind was at the time. And regardless, I think that having some of these books on the shelf, even though unread, just in itself sort of makes you a smarter person. I'm sure literally that is not true. But a couple of books years and years ago in Evanston, I worked just around the corner from an old bookstore whose name was somehow derived from a Charles Dickens story. And in there, I saw some books that I coveted. And at the time, it was impossible for me to get them. They were well above my price range. Many years later, I did pick them up. I can't pinpoint, but they have been with me a long while yet as well, largely unread. So let me show you the first. That's Aristotle. I don't think I've ever really read any Aristotle except brief snippets from the Poetics and the Nicomachean Ethics. Is that it? But it's so long ago that it really does not count. And at that time when I was picking that up, I also picked up a complete Plato. Now, you'll see that this desire to be a completist has always lingered in my heart. I've been sort of a guy who wants to be Steve Donahue, but will not open the first page. And so I think that my journey from where I have been to where I am, and hopefully where I am headed, is something worth recounting. Now, the only reason that I am making this video tonight, other than having watched Alana's really nice video, which I will link in the description, is that I was a bit sick for a couple of days. And just this morning, I started reading George Eliot's Silas Marner. I did 2 chapters, and this would be a perfect evening for me to knuckle down and knock out a bunch more chapters, but I just don't feel like reading. One thing that I've learned with reading is that the transition state is particularly difficult. As with writing, I wrote poetry for most of my adult life and a fair portion of my pre-adult life. And writing a poem is not such a great accomplishment. Writing a 14-line sonnet or writing a 400-page epic, what is difficult is making the transition from being a living, breathing human being to being something akin to a dead person. And I've realized that with reading, it is somewhat similar. You have to die a little bit in order to read. Let me just finish up this show and tell. All of this will come back. At one point, I read a bunch of Russians, and I had taken a year off of Facebook. And so I don't retain any record, or at least any easily accessible record, of when it was or what I was reading. I keep referring to it as a dozen or so Russians, and that probably was right. I remember taking a picture of all the books that I had read stacked up, and I was very proud of it, but not being on Facebook at the time, I had no place to post it, and I think, you know, who keeps a picture of a stack of books? Nobody. So it's gone, and I could spend an afternoon and dig out the books and thereby reconstruct exactly what they were, if not the sequence in which I read them. But I'm more interested, I suppose, in what I failed to do. So I read Resurrection by Tolstoy during that period and loved it. And I, being the completist, wanted to read his short stories. And with Tolstoy, I am content with the Maud translation. And, you know, I did a video about Folio Society books, and I did not include this. This is the complete stories of Tolstoy, which I have not read. Now, I have read individual stories in Penguin editions and that sort of thing, but as far as going through the whole thing, I did not. And I didn't even remember that I had this. When I made the Folio Society, I omitted this because at the time of purchase, I didn't know that it was Folio Society or that Folio Society was a thing. Since being on BookTube, a lot of this stuff has come more into focus, or since watching BookTube as well, you know, more than spouting. And then one book that I did try, and this ended my Russian period, was War and Peace, which I went to the Everyman Library, and I opted for that in part because it was the 3-volume set. And when you are trying to read, you have to do what increases your chance for success. You can't do something that decreases your chance for success. And this did that. Just, I felt having it in separate volumes, it would be easy to handle, easy to carry around. In the end, I did not succeed. I got 109 pages into here and let it go. Now, the only other set of books that I would like to include in this is a set of books which I picked up in China years ago, and it was a struggle to get these, I think between Beijing and Shanghai, and carrying them, lugging them in a carry-on bag. It was quite difficult, but I did it, and I would like to show you that set just because it's another indication of where my mind was and what I was trying to do, maybe even the kind of person I was hoping to become. I have read more of those, but not in these particular editions that I will show you. Maybe about 45%, something like that, probably in Penguins or something else. But I'm going to have to lift this and move it, and I will just edit out all of the motion stuff. So, that's the big set, the Library of Chinese Classics. So at a time when a lot of people on BookTube are starting a 100 book challenge, which is a program whereby you read 100 books that you own before buying another book, I just want to talk up a little bit the virtues of owning books that you don't read. It, unless you are a professional writer, probably, there is more to be said about owning books that you haven't read than ones that you have read. If you are a writer, you're always thinking of having to go back and refer to something. And so a lot of my books and my holding on to things, my stickiness with books has evolved from that impetus to some degree. Now I've stopped writing largely at this point. It could resume again. But so I wanted to show those, and then I will try to give some account. Now, the earliest reading that I did is completely untraceable. I don't even know how old I was, but I was young. My sister was a little bit older, and I believe her friend was in the bookstore and came across a copy of Emma by Jane Austen. And so my sister read it, and then I read it, and that led me into a phase of reading several novels by Jane Austen, and then into the Brontes, where I read the big ones by each. Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Anne's Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and Emily's the one about Heathcliff. And now in the case of not Jane Eyre, in the case of Charlotte Bronte, I did pick up some of her other volumes and never made any progress in them. As you become a reader, you're not going to like everything, and you probably should not be attempting everything. I understand now that you would be better served taking one slim essay by Aristotle and reading it, digesting it, reading it again, and becoming familiar with it. You would be better served by doing that than owning his complete works. However, it nevertheless has served a good purpose of just reminding me that Aristotle is there. He is there, and he will be there after I am not here. And those books will go off to Better World Books or someplace like that for someone else's edification, or even just as an item to stare at. Now, before I go back to my history, I should also mention that one thing that I'm not going to talk about is my history reading poetry, because that is a separate matter. Here I'm just talking about my progress as a reader. Anything with poetry has been a sort of shop-related reading that I would have done, and even to a large degree so has history. Now it's impossible to make a hard and fast distinction, between what you're reading for your job, as it were, and what you're reading just for pleasure. These early books by Austen and the Brontes were pleasure. Thoughts of poetry, thoughts of writing were not mixed in with that experience in the least. And it is only since those thoughts of writing have evaporated, that I have again become devoted to reading. The other book that I recall my sister and I both reading was Laclos, Les Liaisons Dangereuses. I don't remember if there was another. And somewhere along the line in college, I remember picking it up from the University of Illinois, Chicago Circle campus bookstore, was a copy of Dead Souls by Gogol, translated by David Magarshak. Penguin now has a new translation, but that book made a big impression on me. I think sometime before that, and possibly ending out the period with the Brontes and Austen, was when I picked up a signet edition of Anna Karenina. I'm thinking now that it was probably also translated by David Magarshak, but at the time I did not consider such things. It would have not mattered to me at all, and I was much too young for that book at the time, but I did manage to make my way through it, and so it counts as a milestone. It was not my cup of tea, so by the time, much later, that I read Resurrection, I liked that so much better than Anna Karenina, and perhaps I will go back one day, though I am less inclined. I think, if anything, I will tackle those stories before. And even then, your objectives change, and even that, it may turn out that I have had enough of Tolstoy. I notice that Tolstoy is not a writer who sticks with me particularly well, and I think when that happens, there's usually a reason for it, and maybe it's just not meant to be. So I'm open with that, but if I keep living and keep reading, I don't know. We'll see where this course takes me. There's an endless number of books out there. Now, I think I will try to read some of the Facebook posts that I had written, and this is going to be kind of all over the place. So this was a Facebook post from March 2021, when I had begun to think seriously about trying to become a better reader, or as I probably phrased it, to read more. So 9 months before I knuckled down and started keeping my log. This was privacy set to me only, but I obviously wanted to keep it accessible to myself, perhaps for a day such as this when I wanted to take stock. Here's what I wrote. Post from March 16th, 2021. I read Anna Karenina when I was rather young and got nothing out of it. Whenever was the year that EFTPS started up, I read Don Quixote. EFTPS started in the fall of 1996. We had a lot of downtime while they were building up the program, and so I decided to make use of it and read Don Quixote. Some years back, you may recall, this was Facebook time then, I read The Tale of Genji and the Cairo trilogy in succession. A couple of years ago, I hit maybe a dozen Russian novels, including Tolstoy's great but not too long Resurrection. Among those books was the brothers Karamazov and Grossman's Life and Fate. I've never managed any of the great Chinese novels or the French. I reached my limits. After Middlemarch, which I listened to rather than read, I realized I'd probably not read another Eliot, nor after Tess, another Hardy. I have just started my third Eliot. I envy my friends and others not my friends who have stronger reading habits than I, but we have to be realistic. I think at this time War and Peace might be possible. It was not possible. That year that I took off from Facebook, I read a lot of novels, several of them Russian classics that had long been on my list. Lastly, I attempted War and Peace, but after 100 or so pages fell away. Needless to say, with another year and more between then and now, I look upon that period as having been rewarding. Novels had never been my thing, and that was the case. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Having read Brothers Karamazov is a good fallback for something to think about at unexpected moments. And since people online are always bringing up Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, it has been useful to have an acquaintance with it. This is from May 22 of 2022, so after I had already started recording my progress. I note via Facebook that it is little more than 6 years ago that I first began to read novels. They were South Side Dreams by B.K. Ray, The Tale of Genji, and the Cairo Trilogy. The trilogy by Naguib Mahfouz, incidentally the author of whom I've read most novels just by sheer accident. Sometime later, I burned through about a dozen Russians, long and short, at a time when I was off Facebook. The pinnacle of that was the Brothers Karamazov. At that time, also, I failed to get through Thucydides, whose book had been in my ken since, along with Brothers, it was given to me by a neighbor after it didn't sell at a garage sale. So we're talking very young. Sometime after reading Brothers, I failed at War and Peace and spiraled off from Russians. I've read a few big books since then which feel like milestones. Black Reconstruction in the realm of nonfiction, and then I went through a phase in which I ingested Frederick Douglass's last and longest autobiography. I had already read his second somewhere before that. And Middlemarch on audiobook, not to mention shorter novels by Thomas Hardy, that's Tess, and one by Johann Boher. I think it's the Story of a Lie, which is marvelous and not available in print. Since January of this year, I've been pressing it harder. I'm even keeping a logbook. Right now, it feels like I've been rather stuck because the plum in the golden vase has taken longer than I would like. I breezed through the Count of Monte Cristo in February, but also hurt my eyes. Plum cannot be more than twice its length, yet it's taken me insuperably longer. Nevertheless, having passed the midpoint of volume 4 in page count and aware that volume 5 is the last and slimmest, I'm heartened to press on. My reading speed is less than I would like. Laziness is the main factor impeding me, but there are health and life issues that intervene from time to time. But my retention has improved, and I believe with dedication, so can speed. It's more a matter of focus for me than lines per minute. All this for one who long stood outside the world of books like the Keats of Yeats gazing into the candy shop window. All this feels remarkable. As what I've read expands, so does the horizon on my desires. Plum, in its entirety, was never a serious consideration, But now it seems feasible, and I've begun to think about other books. And I did finish it. Alana mentioned that having something like Brothers Karamazov under your belt, so to speak, does make it easier to read something that's less than that. And so that is the case also with The Plum in the Golden Vase. Last night I placed an order for Volume 1 of Penguin's Arabian Nights and Volume 1 of Penguin's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Both are 3-volume sets. This is auguring no commitment, but merely to whet my appetite and test by glancing over the intros whether they will be possible. And then I go on, and as I said, the finishing of those 2 books, which I only heard about through BookTube and again through Steve Donahue's channel. I would not have known that those complete editions existed. That is where I started my BookTube career. And so I think I will leave this video off at this point and resume at some point when I feel ready for it with an accounting of my 2022 reading. I have not done a tally or a counting of the number of books. I don't think that the number of books is real useful for me. I think that some sort of a page count number might be, but it's not the sort of clerical task I care to undertake. So I will leave this rest at this point, and I won't resume this series, which will be just a series of 3, I suppose, anytime soon, but I will try to mark it out somehow differently, my history of reading or something like that. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.